Hello, I'm Anthony, in the process of writing this song called Littleland at the moment. I've written a keyboard sequence for it, an arpeggiated thing, and I'm in the process of actually making a tutorial series on the synth that I've used, the Arturia SQ-80. It's a really awesome thing. That's what it looks like. Just before we kick off, I'll point you at the Patreon link in the description below. If you enjoy this video, that's an awesome way to help support me. This is what I do full-time these days. There's also a join button by which you can become a YouTube channel member. Alright, that's enough shilling for one day. Let's listen to the sequence. I'll play it start to end, and then I'll have a bit of a chat about what I did to come up with it.
Was that a glint in your eye? What do you know? And like a dusting of snow, there goes the fever. All of the schemes and the dreams half begun, let them fade in the sun, drifting down rivers unknown, lifting our face to the breeze, heading for morning. Somehow I found my way home. Take me to Littleland, tell me a story.
Okay then, let's go through step by step what I did to come up with that sequence. Now it stands to reason that one of the most important decisions you've got to make pretty early on if you're coming up with a synth line is to choose your sound. What I've done here is I've duplicated the original track. The track that you can see up above the original is the one that you're actually hearing in the song. I've duplicated it in order to get to the original preset that I chose when I was trying to come up with this sequence line. Now this Ice of Enceladus preset, straight out of the box, sounds like this. It's really nice. Mine, in contrast, sounds like this. And each one of the changes that I made between those two sounds is all about serving the song. Let's listen to the original in the context. I'll talk about the sequence itself shortly. I'm just concentrating on the sound at the moment. I'll just play the first couple of bars using the original preset sound. The first problem that smacks you straight in the face is that those low notes are tromping all over the bass guitar. So we don't want that kind of frequency competition. I don't want this sequence line getting anywhere near in the way of the bass guitar. And so one of the things that I'm going to do as I basically evolve this preset to the point that I want it is to ensure that I'm taking care of all of those lows. Now, obviously, I could just put a high-pass filter on it and call it done, but I wanted to accentuate the good qualities of the preset sound, of the synth sounds as much as possible, rather than just hacking a load of frequencies away. That's not really the way I like to work. The other problem that the basic presets got is that the high notes, you can see some notes extending even off beyond. The very highest is the A#3 at the end of the piece. Those high notes are being basically lost because they're a little bit too soft, they're a little bit too dull in the original preset sound. So A#3 would be up here. And when I play that note on my preset sound, it's much sharper, much brighter. So I'm doing something about the bass, I'm doing something about the treble, and then the rest of it is all going to be about basically curating the sound, getting it as close as possible. So let's have a look what I actually did. First change I made was just a little tweak to the oscillators. Oscillator 3, as you can see on my preset over here, has a 2-octave boost on the on that sound, and that's what's giving all of the really high tingly stuff. If I pull that down. So because it's just a sine wave, the most important wave of all, it's really easy to just boost the octave, and I'm not worrying about, you know, harmonics or overtones getting in the way. So it was the perfect candidate of the three oscillators. I did actually try boosting the octave range of each of them. Then there's an absolute slew of stuff going on with the filter. Let's have a look at those. And this is where the vast majority of the sound sculpting comes from on this preset. Starting with something that sounds really good right out of the box, as we've done. I know that I'm fairly close, but I want to introduce more interest, more dynamic content in the filter. So you can see that I've boosted my resonance. So I'm basically editing the original preset to get it closer to mine now. So let's give it some resonance. And then boost that range. And this envelope modulation, envelope 1, we'll have a look at that very shortly, because that's having a secondary effect, which is really important. But now we've brought all of that brightness in, so that's sounding much better. Now in the original preset, LFO3 is actually already mapped into the filter, but it's not doing anything. So once I figured out what it was doing, I decided I didn't want a triangle, swapped it out for a sine wave, and then cranked a load of negative modulation on this. So if I pull that all the way in and turn this triangle into a sine wave, now you can see those two modulations are competing with each other. Let's get it up to the same speed. And now suddenly, between those two different effects, the sine wave basically pulsing the filter forwards and backwards, and the envelope, then we get a far more interesting sound. So let's get on with this envelope and have a look at what it's doing, because this was the third important change that I made. So this is envelope 1, which is applying its modulation effect into the filter. Now you might not even be able to tell visually that there's any difference between them, but there really is. Let's go back to my preset. There's a tiny bit of attack, and when I take it away, it really dramatically changes the sound. If I pull more of it in, you can hear this very fast attack slope having a dramatic modulation effect on the filter, because this thing is absolutely rattling along. This is an arpeggio, so it's an arpeggiator, so every one of those notes basically has its own envelope. So just by dialing in a tiny, I think it was actually at 0.01, just the smallest increment that I could, just makes a much more interesting filter dynamic. Final change I made was to the pan automation. You can see on the original preset, we've got the pan mapped to LFO2. LFO2 is basically a straight line, but it's connected to the modulation wheel. So if I had the right track selected, you'd be able to see, there you go, there's my modulation wheel basically bringing the sine wave in, and that's how you affect the pan. Well, I decided I didn't want control off the modulation wheel. It just makes automation just unnecessarily tricky. So I basically took over manual control of it. And here's LFO2 on my preset, and you can see that I've taken the modulation wheel away and basically just dialed in to taste how much modulation I want. So that's basically the pan sweeping backwards and forwards. So now that I've got the sound that I want, now I have to figure out what the arpeggio is going to be. And if I press a single note, you can hear the arpeggiator doing its thing. So the sequencer is basically, the synthesizer's got its own arpeggiator here. You can see it's in up mode, but then the more notes that you press, if I now press a C major chord, you can hear it playing that chord through all of the octaves. So you basically need to decide what you want your arpeggio to be, and this is where I use the combination of the notes plus automation to basically sweep in when I want the arpeggio to poke its head over the horizon, but then when the singing kicks in, when Pauline's vocal is the dominant part, then pull it down. So the automation is used to drag the volume down in between stages, but we've also got these little tingling notes every now and again. One of these F3s or D3s right up at the top of the range is just kind of peeking out, and so the effect that that gives us, let's solo it, is this. You can hear the volume kind of coming down when it needs to be out of the way, and then just pushing up. And you can have quite small spikes. See, this spike over here is really only kind of nudging up just momentarily. It just gives the note an opportunity to kind of poke out, and then we pull the volume down. I'll just let this this little bump run through. In terms of the notes themselves, how I actually come up with these patterns, it's essentially taking the steer from the chord track. As you can see, we've got all of the chords written in for this song. Let's cycle around the first 8 bars, which is just a B flat, and then we can have a closer look at what's actually going on in that range. So the notes of B flat, which are the underlying chord, B flat, D and F, would basically give you the suggestion of what the arpeggio is going to be, but there are no Ds in this thing, so I'm basically just keeping it harmonically simple. This is the very beginning of the sequence. I didn't want to get a big hefty chord in. There'd be absolutely no problem if I threw the D in as well. It would have worked perfectly well, but take the D away, just makes it a little bit simpler. You can also see towards the end of the chord I'm bringing in the A, which is the major 7, and it just kind of creates that little bit of tension, which then releases into the A flat major 7, which is the very next chord. So a lot of this is really just starting with your basic chord. What notes out of it do you want to use? And then as I'm feeling if I want some sort of suspension or transition into the next chord, I might very well think about putting the 7th in. And here's the second chord in the sequence. I'm not going to go through all of the chords. It's really just to give you an idea of flavour of how I go about creating these arpeggios. And a lot of this is really dynamic. I'll actually just put my fingers on the keyboard and start kind of feeling what kind of range I want to hear, and all I'm doing is playing first, thirds and fifths here. If I want to start bringing in the major 7s, that's easy enough, and then back to the full major chord. So a lot of it is playing around with the fingers, seeing where on the keyboard it's likely to want to live, and then just pasting those notes in. This E flat major 7 here contains all of the notes of E flat major 7, but you can see that I'm modulating between octaves as well, and that's going to create this effect. So you can hear the arpeggio takes an amount of time to basically play through its notes, and you've almost got complete freedom as to when you introduce the new notes, and it basically just cascades on top of itself. I am an absolute sucker for 80s synths doing arpeggios. They just pretty much always sound completely fantastic. And I'll just switch to keyboard mode so you can actually see what I'm doing. So I can basically play any combination of firsts, thirds, fifths and 7ths. And it just always sounds good. It's almost cheating. It's so easy to come up with a really lovely sounding line, but it's all about them putting it in the context of the song. So again, bringing the vocals back, bringing the full song in. This entire sequence was written exclusively in the full context of the song. At no point did I ever solo it, because I wasn't interested in what the thing sounded like in isolation. I only wanted to hear it in the context of the entire song. One final thing I thought was worth a brief note is this arpeggiated run down. Now, in this section of the song, this is basically right at the very end of the song. We have this cluster of chords, this descending chord pattern. The moment I tried to introduce more than one note in this arpeggio, it just completely fell over itself because the chord patterns are moving too quickly for the arpeggiator to keep up with. So you can see that I'm literally just playing roots, and it sounds like this.
Take me to Littleland, tell me a story.
So in no way do you miss any complexity of the arpeggio there. It needs to be out of the way. I would imagine we've got a little bit of a volume dip. This is the crescendo of the song, so I've kept everything fairly energetic, but I have just pulled down the arpeggio in this section just to give the vocals a little bit more space, and then right at the end come in. When we finish on this B flat on bar 197, then I want to throw the kitchen sink at it, and that's where we have the highest note in the pattern, and that's going to sound like this. Then all of those high notes can kind of tingle off into the distance as the song finishes, and that's our fade out. So a really long tail on this song. I would probably finish it about there. Hope you found that interesting. If you did, please hit the like button. I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot for watching.